That's it's on. There we go. All right. Okay. So for the last several weeks, we've kind of reoriented how we were doing our Bible lessons and Bible studies around here. We've been having a 9:30 children's class here at the church, covering a lesson about the Bible. The women's class also, when they meet, they're covering kind of the same topic. And then we've been covering, again, the same thing, but a little bit more in depth, and something that's more appropriate for the adult audience. And it's been an interesting way of covering the Scripture, and it's been fun to kind of take it in layers, and I've really enjoyed it. So we've been spending time in Hebrews chapter 11 primarily. We've been talking about faith and what faith does for us and how it helps us accomplish God's will. So this week we're going to be primarily talking about verses 20 through 22, but we're going to be kind of bipping back a few verses before that as well. So let's see here if I can. Hey, it works. Who knew? So by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the future. By faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped as he leaned on his staff. By faith, at the end of his life, Joseph at the end of his life mentioned the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave instructions about his burial. So last week, we took a look at the verses just before this, and we talked about Abraham's faith. While he was told to live a nomadic existence, he lived in faith that his descendants would ultimately take possession of Canaan. Just like God promised, he was willing to sacrifice the son that God had given him to do so. He had rock-solid faith that God was able to raise Isaac from the dead after that sacrifice. So, in Genesis 17 and 19, God affirms that his covenant was going to be with Isaac and would be perpetual for Isaac's descendants. 2 verses later, in verse 21, God reaffirms that his covenant would be descended through Isaac, who wasn't even born yet, but would be born less than a year from that date. In some ways, I'd actually kind of like to quibble with the way that faith is used here. The way that it's being used in the actual text is actually accurate, but the problem is when you think about faith, we go back to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. The author states that faith is being sure of what we hope for and being convinced of what we do not see. So that really doesn't fit Abraham or Isaac and even Jacob. You know, Abraham had seen the Lord up close, and I'd submit that it's kind of hard to just have faith in somebody, you know, when you've actually seen them. You've worked with them, you've talked with them, you've had dinner with them, you've laughed at them, you know. So for us, we have faith. You know, it's like at the end of the Gospels, after Christ, you know, had risen and had appeared to the apostles, and you know, Thomas was, you know, I won't believe it's Jesus until I see him and put my hand in his side. You know, Jesus, you know, when he appeared, told Thomas to do it and said, you know, blessed, you know, you are for having seen and believed, but more blessed are the ones that haven't seen and yet believe. So, on the other hand, let's look at the Bible. It chronicles almost 6,000 years of history. Depending on who does the math, who is doing the counting, there are between 2,000 and 3,200 individuals mentioned in the Bible. And only one of them was held out as being perfect by the Scriptures. Of all the others, you know, if they were big enough to merit more than a passing, their faults were noted. So, you know, James and John were ambitious. They, you know, wanted, you know, to sit at, you know, Christ's right and left hand in his kingdom. Peter was a little bit too worried about peer pressure. Let's see, Moses had problems with courage and being willing and able to, you know, he didn't think he could do the things that God had set out for him. You know, David had problems with lust. You know, all the rest of these people in here had you know, we can see where they had imperfections. And that's actually one of the things that I've always loved the most about the Bible. And actually one of the things that gave me faith that it was actually a God-inspired document. Because if you look at any of the mythologies, that were prevalent at the time or even now, if you look at holy works from other religions or the works that they hold as being holy, they almost read like a Tom Clancy novel, right? The good guys are really, really good. The bad guys are really, really bad. It's a very black and white thing. The good guys are perfect. The bad guys are evil. They pick wings off of butterflies, in their spare time when they get bored. So now we're going to go look at the 4 generations referenced by Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through 22. And we're going to look at some of the mistakes they made. And we're also going to see that God has a plan, and that since none of us are perfect, he's forced to rely on imperfect people to take his plan into operation. So first, we have Abraham. Like Ray noted last week, Abraham knew God. In many ways, the relationship that Abraham had with God was closer than the relationship that God had with just about anybody else in the Bible, except, for Jesus, if you're going to count him. But, even knowing God as well as he did, trusting him as well as he did, he still had some issues. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 20. At the beginning of this chapter, Abraham moved to the Negev and settled as a temporary resident in Gerar. Since Sarah was known as a beautiful woman, Abraham decided here in verse 2 to tell everyone in Gerar that Sarah was his sister. And so Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her, wanted to make her his wife. But God appeared to Abimelech in a dream at night and said to him, "You're as good as dead, because the woman you have taken, for she is someone else's wife." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, and he said, "Lord, would you really slaughter an innocent nation? Did Abraham not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' I have done this with a clear conscience and with innocent hands." So Abraham, Abimelech goes to Abraham and kind of reads him the riot act. And Abraham, replies here, "I thought that, nobody feared God in this place. They're going to just kill me and take her anyway, so, what's a little white lie among friends?" So when God made me wander from my father's house, I told her, "This is what you can do to show your loyalty to me. Every place we go, say about me, 'He is my brother.'" And so to Sarah, Abimelech said, "Look, I've given 10,000 pieces of silver to your brother. This is compensation for you, so that you will stand vindicated before all who are with you." And Abraham prayed to God. God healed Abimelech as well as his wife and his female slaves, so they were able to have children. For the Lord had caused infertility to strike every woman in the household of Abimelech, because he took Sarah, Abraham's wife. So, it's pretty painfully obvious that Abraham had, even though he had trust in the Lord, "God, I know you said you're going to bring forth a mighty nation out of my descendants, but I don't trust you to keep me safe from a relatively good king, and Lord, you just might need me to help you out of here a little bit." So we're going to fast forward now about 45 years, give or take a little bit, to the beginning of Genesis chapter 26. Abraham at this point is dead, and Isaac is living in the Negev, kind of around where his father had lived. They're in the middle of a famine at this point. And so who does Isaac go see but his dad's old friend, King Abimelech of Gerar? Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. I think I was a slide behind there. Now, I'm certain that Abraham told Isaac the story of what happened when he and Sarah had gone to stay in Abimelech's territory. I'm sure he said, "Son, I lied to Abimelech about Sarah. I didn't need to. He's an okay guy." It's one of those stories that I'm sure gets passed around the family dinner table on an ongoing basis. And so what's the first thing that Isaac does when he goes to meet his father's old friend, Abimelech? And let's see here. In verse 7, there, that second paragraph, when the men of that place asked him about his wife, he replied, what? "She is my sister." He was afraid to say, "She is my wife," for he thought to himself, "The men of this place will kill me to get Rebekah because she is very beautiful." After Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, happened to look out the window and observed Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah in an unbrotherly way. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, "She is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" Isaac replied, "Because I thought someone might kill me to get her." So about this point, you have to figure that Abimelech kind of looked like that. Abimelech exclaimed, "What in the world have you done to us? One of the men nearly took your wife to bed, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech commanded all the people, "Whoever touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death." So when Isaac planted in that land, he reaped in the same year 100 times what he had sown, because the Lord had blessed him. The man became wealthy. His influence continued to grow until he became very prominent. But as we saw above, God had a plan for the descendants of Abraham. Isaac was blessed by God himself. Long term, as God had promised, a great nation was going to come out of Abraham through him. He met God in a dream. Well, actually, it might not have even been a dream. The scripture says he met him at night. So we don't know if that was dream or waking, and God came through to meet with him the way that he did with his father. So Isaac moves at this point away from Gerar and settles in Beersheba. At this point, in case Isaac had any doubt that God appeared to him, God appeared to him that night and said, the Lord appeared to him that night and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham." Let's see, do I have that? I did not. Okay. "Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So, backing up one chapter now, Isaac's children are in the picture. He had two twin boys, Esau and Jacob, and over time, Esau and Jacob developed a pretty strong case of sibling rivalry. And it didn't help much that both Isaac and Rebekah had favorite children. You're not supposed to have favorite children, right, parents? But everyone knows that, there's always that one kid. For me, I got lucky. I've only got one kid, so she's by default a favorite. So it didn't help that Isaac and Rebekah had favorites, that Isaac preferred Esau because Esau was a man of the outdoors. He was a hunter, and Isaac really liked the taste of fresh game and some of the meals that Esau would prepare for him, and Rebekah preferred Jacob instead. So even though Esau was the firstborn, Jacob ended up getting out most of the rights and privileges that were worth having, the rights and privileges of the firstborn that were worth having over time. In Genesis 25, 29 through 34, Jacob ends out conniving Esau's birthright away from him, effectively, steals it almost. It's not fair to call it theft, as Esau willingly gave up his birthright for some of the stew. So Jacob cooked some stew, and when Esau came in from the open fields, he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me some of the red stuff. Yes, this because I'm starving." So he was also called Edom. But Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look," said Esau, "I'm about to die. What use is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear an oath to me now." And so Esau swore an oath to him, sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate and drank, and then got up and went out. So Esau despised his birthright. So, I submit that, in the spirit of Christ, that forcing your brother, your flesh and blood, to sell his birthright to you is probably not the sort of thing that God wants you to do. And doesn't really come under the heading of, love your neighbor, love your brother as yourself. So, instead of being happy to help his brother and serve his brother, he used this as an opportunity to swindle his brother. And then at the end of Isaac's life, Jacob lies to his father to steal his brother's blessing as well. With his mother's help, he impersonates his brother and fixes some tasty food for his father. Okay, got to hit the right button on this thing, I guess. There we go. So, at this point, Isaac is almost blind. And he says when he goes out, at the beginning of this chapter, he's telling Esau, one last time for me, son, go out, find something, kill it, skin it, throw it in the pot, spice it the way you always do. I love the way that you cook your food. And Esau hurries right out to fulfill his father's wishes. At this point, Rebekah finds out about this, grabs Jacob, grabs a goat kid from the pasture out back, and basically they kill it, skin it. Rebekah fixes the stew the way that she knows that Isaac likes it, and then takes the skin from that goat kid and puts it on Jacob's hands and arms, so that when Isaac says to Jacob, come closer so I can touch you, my son, and know for certain if you really are my son Esau, Jacob went over to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So Isaac blessed Jacob. Then he asked, are you really my son Esau? I am, Jacob replied. Moments after Jacob receives his father's blessing, he leaves, and in walks Esau. He and Isaac immediately pieced together what Jacob had just done, which made Esau incredibly angry, angry enough that he swore that as soon as his father died and the period of mourning had ended, that he was going to kill his brother Jacob. So Jacob ends up deciding that discretion is the better part of valor, and he leaves his father's house in search of a wife of his own, and getting himself, at the same time he gets himself away from a brother who's pretty irritated with him at that point. Isaac tells Jacob to find Laban, Rebekah's uncle, and as soon as he does, Laban gives him a taste of his own medicine. Jacob stays with Laban for a month and then decides to ask for Rachel's hand in marriage in return for working for Laban for 7 years. The problem is that once the 7 years were up, Laban ends up sneaking Leah, Rachel's older sister, into the deal. When Jacob wakes up in the morning after the wedding ceremony and finds that he's married Leah instead, he's angry at being tricked. It's not something, we don't believe in karma around here, but it's kind of one of those karmic things anyway. Now you know what it feels like, to be swindled or tricked. So he got to spend another 7 years working to earn Rachel, and maybe contemplating how his brother must have felt to be swindled out of his birthright. But still, after his sons and daughter were born, Jacob decides to swindle Laban out of a large number of livestock, so he didn't learn his lesson. In Genesis chapter 30, verse 25, after Joseph was born, Jacob tried to leave Laban to start his own household. At this point, he had amassed quite a bit of wealth. He had some fairly large herds, a lot of camels, sheep, goats, cattle, a large group of people working with him and for him. And Laban knows that he's only doing as well as he is because Jacob is living there, taking care of everything for him, managing all the herds, managing the livestock, managing the fields, and all the rest of that. So finally, Jacob agrees to stay if Laban will agree to give him all of the speckled or spotted sheep or goats and every dark-colored lamb. Once Laban agrees, what does Jacob do? He goes out and starts setting little snares. Well, it's not really right to call them snares. He'd whittle back on sticks and put the sticks in places where the goats would eat and drink, so it would mark their coats to make it look like they had streaks or spots. And he'd particularly do that if we saw really healthy goats, female goats getting ready to mate. So he'd have the goat and the kids too. So even though Jacob had an eye for material goods and was not above telling a lie, if he felt it was needed, God had a plan for his children based on a promise to his grandfather. God worked through him and blessed him. Joseph, as we know, was ultimately sold into slavery by his brothers. We talked a little bit about that this morning. A situation that ultimately leads to him being made second only to Pharaoh in all of Egypt. So, unlike his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, there's nothing that bad recorded about him in the book of Genesis. He's a hard worker, he's faithful to God, he doesn't hold a grudge against his brothers, even when they were absolutely positive that he would. ultimately, through Joseph's patronage, the children of Israel secured the best land in all Egypt. Ultimately, after the Exodus, God's plans for the nation of Israel and his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Joseph all come to fruition. Really about the only thing you can say bad about Joseph was that he was, kind of that kid. Every family, has got the one kid that's, to borrow something from Ray Stevens, The Birth of Better Than Thou. He was the one that was always trying to be the teacher's pet, daddy's pet, mommy's pet. Look at what I did, isn't that great? And his father, because he was one of his father's two favorite sons, because he was he was one of only two sons that came from Rachel. His dad made him this beautiful tunic. And he runs around telling all of his brothers, look at this tunic the dad made me. Yeah, he loves me more than he loves you, right? But he doesn't stop to think that, acting like that, could end up maybe irritating his brothers and get him, it ends up getting him sold into slavery. Part of God's plan, because by the time Joseph gets to Egypt and gets Egypt situated and gets them prepared for the 7-year famine that's coming, he already had a place prepared for his family so that when they came to him and needed help, he was there to give it to them. And he got them situated in a really nice place there in the land of Egypt for them to be safe and grow. So what does this mean for us? God always has a plan, and he has assigned parts in that plan to all of creation. These men all knew that they were imperfect, just as we are imperfect. But if you start in Hebrews 11:17 and go through verse 22, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph all knew that they wouldn't live to see the founding of the nation of Israel. God was always speaking, in the future perfect tense when he talked to any one of the four about this. One day this is going to happen. One day, you're not going to live to see it. Your kids aren't going to live to see it. Your grandkids aren't going to live to see it, but ultimately it's going to happen. They knew they'd never see the promised land or have any ownership of it. Well, actually, I think Abraham and Isaac were there as nomads for a little bit, but God explicitly told them not to have or own any land there because that was going to be his gift to their descendants. So very few of us get tapped on the head by God and verbally told what his long-term plan actually is for us. I think I told this story once before, but a guy that I've trained with for a while with shooting, he actually started out his adult life in the Navy as an officer on board nuclear submarines. But he'd always felt God kind of tapping him on the shoulder and said, telling him, no, you need to go into the ministry. And he fought it as hard as he could. Had no desire to go into the ministry. Well, actually, he kind of did, but he wanted to be a Navy officer more. And God kept pulling at him. And then in his words, God sent him a drunk driver and a pretty badly mangled leg to keep him out of the Navy, or to get him out of the Navy, and put him in a position to where God actually could start working on him to turn him into the minister God wanted him to be. So every once in a while, God will really rap on your head like that, but sometimes he doesn't. But even for me personally, I can look back at my life, even just going back to when I turned 18. The career I had in the military, meeting my wife, the decisions that we made to move around, where we moved, which jobs we took, all put us on a path that finally led me here to be able to speak to you today about this, and brought me back to the faith when I was away from it. So, I'm still trying to serve God, whatever way I'm capable of doing today, but I'm not perfect either, and none of us are. So if you're at a point where in your life you're not sure where you should go or what you should do, rest assured that God knows. He knows what plan he has for you. He knows what he wants you to do. If you relax and you pray, he'll let you in on the secret, or at least point you in the direction that you need to go. He'll have a plan for you, and you won't have to be perfect to complete it. You'll just have to seek after him with all your heart and let his plan for you unfold in its own time. Or if you're a member here and you need prayers or counsel of an elder to help you refine your purpose, we invite you to come forward as we stand and sing the invitation song.